Sure, here's a dramatic and inspiring science fiction short story based on your title. The Last Hope of the Galaxy: How Mankind's Unbreakable Spirit Brought Unity and Defied the Ancient Alien Overlords. In the year 3129, Earth was but a memory, scorched in the Great Purge by the Varnak Dominion, ancient alien overlords who ruled the galaxy with psychic dominion and technological might. Humanity had been scattered, fractured, and all but broken. Colonies that once thrived among the stars had fallen into silence, their lights snuffed out by Varnak warfleets. Only whispers of mankind remained, huddled on distant moons and crumbling space stations, hiding in asteroid belts like ghosts afraid of their own echo. But in the black void of despair, something stirred. On the ice moon of Europa, a young woman named Commander Ela Navarro ignited the spark of rebellion. Born in the shadow of extinction, she carried within her the stories of Earth, the music, the courage, the defiance. More than that, she carried something the Varnak had not anticipated: unity. The Varnak ruled by division, exploiting species rivalries, manipulating fear. But humans had evolved past survival. They had learned to hope, to believe. And when Ela sent out a beacon signal, a call to all lost human outposts and sympathetic alien species, it was not just a cry for help. It was a declaration. "We are still here," the signal said, "and we remember who we are." Across the galaxy, remnants of humanity answered. Miners from the asteroid colonies, technomancers from the machine worlds, even the legendary exiled Titan-born clans of Mars returned. With them came alien defectors, the insectoid Zulka warriors, the crystal singers of Elrune, and even a rogue Varnak seer who had seen in humanity something their ancient race had long forgotten: will. Ela forged the Unity Accord, the first galactic pact not born of conquest, but of cooperation. Under her command, the Unity Fleet was born, a mismatched, ragtag armada held together not by strength, but by purpose. The final battle came at the Nexus Singularity, the seat of Varnak power. The overlords expected fear. They received resolve. Outnumbered, outgunned, and facing extinction, the Unity Fleet fought not for revenge, but for future. They disrupted the Varnak mindweb, exposed their lies, and transmitted the truth across the stars. The overlords were not gods. They were relics of an old order, terrified of change. The battle was long. The price was steep. But in the end, the Varnak fell, not to weapons, but to the undeniable force of unity. Years later, under the silver light of a rebuilt Earth's twin suns, Ela stood at the summit of the Galactic Forum. Statues of every species stood beside one another, and children from across the stars played beneath a sky once ruled by fear. Humanity, once scattered and broken, had become the spark that reignited the galaxy's soul. They had defied extinction. They had remembered who they were. They had become the last hope and the first light of a new era. Would you like this expanded into a longer story or adapted into a screenplay or comic format? Here is the next part of the story, continuing from where we left off. Chapter 2: Embers of Rebellion. Though the Varnak overlords had fallen at the Battle of the Nexus Singularity, the galaxy was far from healed. In the power vacuum they left behind, chaos surged. Pirate fleets, warlords, and Varnak loyalists roamed the stars, trying to claw back control. The Unity Accord was young, fragile, and still learning to govern a galaxy unchained. Commander Ela Navarro, now appointed High Chancellor of the Unity Forum, refused to rest. While the statues and ceremonies honored peace, she knew the real work had just begun. From her flagship, the Aegis Rising, she watched over the Rim territories, border worlds teetering between hope and collapse. One such world, Helos 3, sent a distress call. A Varnak remnant force had taken control of the planet's gravity wells, threatening to crash its orbital colonies unless the Unity forces withdrew. Ela didn't flinch. She assembled a strike team, not of soldiers, but symbols: a human engineer, a Zulka berserker, an Elrune mindweaver, and a young Martian-born pilot named Kale, whose parents had died during the Purge. Each of them carried a story, a scar, and a reason to fight. Their mission was impossible: infiltrate the Varnak fortress and disable the planetary core without triggering its self-destruct failsafe. But this wasn't just another operation. This was a message. That the Unity Accord did not abandon its people. That peace did not mean passivity. And that rebellion, true rebellion, was not the act of war, but of refusal to let fear decide the future. They landed under cover of a solar storm. The fortress was more than steel and shadow. It was a temple to the old Varnak psyche, cold, cruel, calculating. Traps were everywhere. The remnant commander, a Varnak warseer named Zertel, taunted them from within, proclaiming the inevitability of human failure. But Zertal did not understand the unbreakable spirit of the team he faced. The Mindweaver calmed the fortress's defense systems. The engineer bypassed the core failsafe. The Zulka roared through lines of drones. And Kale, young, reckless, brilliant, piloted their evac shuttle through a collapsing canyon of gravitational collapse with laughter on his lips. When they returned, Helos 3 erupted in celebration. For the first time since the fall, an entire sector pledged itself not out of fear, but out of faith. Ela watched the stars that night and whispered a promise to the galaxy. We are not done. Would you like to continue with Chapter 3, perhaps exploring the rogue Varnak seer's perspective or a deeper galactic threat emerging? Absolutely, here's Chapter 3 of the story. Chapter 3, The Seer's Awakening. In the cold expanse of the Carthan Expanse, beyond the reach of most known star charts, floated a structure older than memory, a mind vault carved from obsidian stone and living plasma, pulsing faintly like a dying star. It was here that Valerix, the rogue Varnak seer, had retreated after the fall of the overlords. Once a revered prophet in the Varnak Empire, Valerix had seen visions the others refused to believe, visions of their decline, of human defiance, of unity forged through pain and perseverance. He had warned them. They had laughed. Now, he wandered the corridors of the Mind Vault, communing with the echoes of those long dead. The Varnak were not a species so much as a mind hive, sustained by ancient neural archives and psionic echoes. The fall of the Dominion had broken their link, but Valerix still heard whispers. Something was coming. Something older than even the Varnak. Something that fed on conflict. From the shadows of the collapsed empires, it had begun to stir, a force known only in fractured records as the Silence Beyond. It had no fleet, no flag, no voice, only a pull. Like gravity in the soul, unity was its antithesis, peace was its poison. Valerix opened a psychic channel to Ela Navarro. Their minds met in a torrent of memory and thought, battlefields, ancient stars, unspoken grief. She hesitated. The scars of war were not easily set aside. But Valerix did not speak as a conqueror. He spoke as a warning. There is something worse than us, he said, worse than domination. It devours hope. It thrives on disunity. If your unity accord fractures, it will come, and when it does, not even our bones will remain. Ela listened, wary but resolute. Her trust was hard-earned, but she had learned that enemies could become allies if the future demanded it. She summoned the Unity Council for an emergency session. Not everyone believed. Some still saw Valerix as the enemy. Others questioned if the threat was real or merely Varnak deception. But as star systems across the outer edges went dark, communications severed, populations vanished without a trace, the truth became undeniable. The galaxy was no longer just recovering. It was standing on the edge of a deeper abyss. And once more, it would be mankind's unbreakable spirit that determined whether all life fell into silence or stood together against it. Would you like Chapter 4 to dive into the origins of the Silence Beyond or the Unity Council's response? Here is Chapter 4 of the story. Chapter 4, Shadows in the Stars. The stars were dying. Not literally, not yet, but in system after system along the outer veil. Light was fading. Entire sectors once brimming with trade, signal chatter, and life had gone silent, as if swallowed whole. No debris, no transmissions, no screams, just absence. The Unity Council convened in orbit around Varelli's Prime, a neutral world chosen for its psychic shielding and secure comms. Tension cut through the air like plasma fire. Delegates from dozens of species debated, argued, accused. Was this a Varnak trick? A power grab? Or was the rogue seer telling the truth? Ela Navarro stood before them all, silent until the shouting dulled. She projected the data they had gathered, an expanding region of void, unnatural and precise, engulfing stars in a pattern that resembled an ancient Varnak glyph, unbinding. The only voice that dared speak afterward was Valerix's. The silence beyond is not a force. It is entropy, weaponized. It does not conquer. It consumes identity, memory, being. My kind once glimpsed it in presentience. We built our empire to fight it, then forgot why. Now, it remembers us. The chamber froze. Then Ela spoke. Then we give it a reason to forget again. Within a week, the Unity Accord authorized Project Luminarch, a coalition effort unlike anything since the Nexus War. Mankind offered the core architecture, a lattice of interstellar beacons designed to amplify collective consciousness, a kind of galactic neural web to resist the pull of the silence. The Elrune added harmonic crystal cores. The Zulka donated war bioforms to defend construction sites. And Valerix, for the first time, stepped fully into the Unity Alliance. But even as the first Luminarch nodes were deployed, the silence responded. It hissed into the minds of the sensitive. Engineers died screaming with eyes turned black. Starships reported systems vanishing from their maps, coordinates erased mid-jump. And on the mining colony of Juro 9, an entire population began forgetting who they were, their languages unraveling, their names drifting from memory. It didn't need to fire a shot. It was erasing the galaxy's identity. Ela ordered a counterstrike, Operation Dawnbreaker. Her fleet would jump to Juro 9, attempt a psychic anchor using the first completed Luminarch core, and test if unity of thought, shared memory, could beat back the dark. Kale, the Martian pilot now a squadron leader, volunteered first. If the silence wants our stories, he said, we tell them louder. They arrived in chaos. Juro 9 was cracked, its orbitals spiraling. The planet itself shimmered with distortion, gravity bent inward, time twisted. But the Luminarch core, planted like a defiant heart in the chaos, began to sing. Voices from across the stars joined it, memories, hopes, names of the lost, children reciting poems from Earth, songs of mourning from Elrune, battle chants of the Zulka, and through it all, Ela's voice. We are not forgotten, we are not alone, we remember. The distortion faltered, the pulse slowed. For the first time, the silence beyond retreated. It could consume the forgotten. But not the united. Not yet. Would you like Chapter 5 to reveal more about the origins of the silence, or show a deeper internal threat within the unity itself? Here is Chapter 5 of the story. Chapter 5, The Fracture Within. Victory at Juro 9 was celebrated across the Unity Accord, but Ela Navarro felt no triumph, only urgency. The silence had retreated, yes, but only temporarily. It had tasted resistance, and now it would adapt. Worse still, the Luminarch network, so vital to survival, was fragile. Each node required harmony across dozens of cultures, and that, Ela feared, was the real threat, not just the silence beyond, but the silence within. Reports trickled in of discontent. Zulka warriors accused Unity Command of limiting their sacred battle rights. Elrune memory keepers protested the human-centric nature of the Luminarch resonance codes. Even among human factions, old Earth nationalist sentiments began to resurface. Colonists from Titan refused to transmit through the Accord's beacons, claiming mind invasion. And then a Luminarch node on Vega 3 imploded, not from outside attack, but sabotage. The first suspect, a Unity delegate from the human dominion of Elysium, known for its isolationist policies. But when interrogated, the delegate repeated only one phrase, over and over, in a dull monotone. Nothing means anything, we return to the void, let us become silence. The darkness hadn't just attacked systems. It had seeded doubt. Ela convened with Valerix in the crystalline chamber aboard the Aegis Rising. He studied the neural pattern left behind in the saboteur's mind. A fragment, he said grimly. The silence learns through memory. It plants fractures, like viruses. No weapon, just a thought, you are alone. Ela stared at the shimmering starscape beyond the viewport. And if enough believe it? Valerix turned to her, his voice heavy with ancient weight. Then the Luminarch will fall from within, and Unity will die not in fire, but in forgetting. Desperate for insight, Ela ordered an unprecedented act. She, Kale, and Valerix would dive into the neural grave, a derelict Varnak megastructure lost in deep space, once used to imprison memories too dangerous to erase. It might hold a record of the silence's first contact with the galaxy. They arrived to find it intact and alive. Echoes of Varnak ancestors walked its halls, trapped in endless cycles of terror. Visions assaulted them, civilizations vanishing into dust, stars collapsing without warning, minds dissolving like smoke. Kale nearly lost himself, but Ela anchored him, recounting their shared memories, their losses, their victories. At the core of the grave, Valerix uncovered the truth. The silence beyond was not born of matter, but of meaning unmade. It had first been summoned by a forgotten race that tried to erase all suffering from their history. In doing so, they erased purpose. The silence was the echo of their emptiness. It was not evil. It was emptiness weaponized. And its only enemy was connection. Returning from the grave, Ela issued her boldest move yet, Project Emberlight, a neural fusion initiative, melding species memories into shared archives, accessible to all. The plan was controversial, risky, and vulnerable to backlash. But she no longer feared opposition. She feared silence. In her address to the galaxy, she said, "Our strength isn't in how loud we speak, it's in how deeply we listen to each other. The silence feeds on isolation, let it choke on our unity." One by one, voices began to rise. Not perfect, not clean, but shared. The galaxy, once again, leaned toward the light. But in the outer dark, the silence watched and waited. Because even now, it had found a new host. And this time, it wore a human face. Would you like Chapter 6 to follow the new host of the silence, or focus on Ela and Kale uncovering the hidden betrayal? Here is Chapter 6 of the story. Chapter 6, The Whispering Flame. The defector's name was Terran Voss, a celebrated human diplomat and unity counselor from the Arcturus Reach. He had once stood shoulder to shoulder with Ela Navarro, advocating peace between long-feuding species. He was a beacon of unity, a voice of reason. But something had changed. His recent speeches were quieter, colder. He began to speak not of hope, but of inevitability. He questioned the strain of holding a fractured galaxy together. He suggested selective withdrawal from high-conflict sectors. He advocated for letting the Luminarch network self-prune under stress. At first, no one suspected. Until a surveillance node caught him alone, whispering to empty rooms. "They fight so hard for meaning, but it's all shadows. Let it end. Let it fade." When confronted, Terran seemed lucid, calm, but the scans told a different story. His neural patterns bore the exact frequency found in the Vega 3 saboteur, a psychic parasite, the silence, inhabiting him. But it had evolved. Where it once erased, now it could imitate. Terran was not mindless. He was articulate, persuasive, a living mask for the silence beyond. He escaped custody within hours. Ela, Valerix, and Kale reviewed his path and found the trail led not outward but inward, to Sol. To Earth. Reclaimed only a decade prior, Earth was now the symbolic heart of unity, home to the Great Archive, the central Luminarch resonance chamber, and Emberlight's deepest memory cores. If corrupted there, the entire neural defense network could collapse. Ela didn't hesitate. She ordered a full lockdown of the Sol system, no ship in or out. She and Kale would descend personally with an elite team, hunting Terran through the ruins of old cities and the rebuilt towers of New Geneva. But Terran was already inside the archive. They found his message pulsing across the Luminarch resonance like poison in a bloodstream. "You built this to remember, but the galaxy is tired of remembering. Let it forget. Let it rest." Across dozens of systems, Luminarch nodes began flickering. Species-old wounds reopened. Memory sharing began to break down. A wave of disunity swept the outer colonies, small rebellions sparking. And at the center, Ela faced the one man who had once been her friend. He stood beneath the archive's great light spire, surrounded by psionic mirrors reflecting every memory in the Unity Accord. His eyes shimmered with black fire. "You should understand, Ela," he said. "We fought so hard, but maybe peace was never meant to last. Maybe the silence is mercy." But Ela's voice did not waver. "No, mercy is the choice to endure, to keep building, to remember, even when it hurts." And then Kale stepped forward, holding the last ember core, a neural fuse encoded with the memory of humanity's darkest hour, the day Earth burned, a memory too painful to carry alone. But they carried it anyway. He activated the core. The archive flared, not with destruction, but with truth, grief, unity, struggle, joy, loss. Terran screamed, not in pain, but in revelation. The silence inside him could not bear the weight of remembered love. And it fled. Terran collapsed, alive, broken, free. But as Ela looked into the pulsing stars above Earth, she knew the battle had only shifted. The silence was not just an enemy. It was a reflection of what the galaxy could become if it forgot what made it worth saving. Would you like Chapter 7 to explore a deeper origin of the silence? Or follow the next phase of the Emberlight Network's expansion and how it's changing the galaxy? Here is Chapter 7 of the story. Chapter 7, The Heart of Emberlight. Months passed since the fall of Terran Voss. The Unity Accord stood shaken but intact. Trust, once cracked, was reforged in shared pain. Across the galaxy, the Emberlight Network expanded, more than just defense. It became a living memory, a galactic neural tapestry where the histories of every world, every people, were preserved and shared. Ila Navarro stood at its nexus, the Sanctum Core on Kepler Station, orbiting the long-dead world of Urin. There, the final Luminarch convergence was being prepared, a fusion of all memories, all light, into a signal so powerful it could anchor conscious thought even in systems touched by the silence. But the silence had learned too. It no longer simply erased or whispered. It divided. Reports of a new ideology were emerging, groups calling themselves the Children of Stillness. Not infected, not possessed, willing. They claimed the silence offered peace, freedom from memory, freedom from pain, a galaxy beyond guilt, beyond war, beyond need. Their numbers were growing. Kale, now Admiral of the Flamewing Fleet, led a mission to intercept a stillness stronghold on the moon of Ithar. What he found shocked even him: families, teachers, thinkers, not mindless, but devoted. And at their center was a child. Human, no older than 10. Radiating silence like a sun. She looked up at Kale and spoke gently. You keep holding on because you're afraid to let go, but the stars don't scream when they die. Why should we? He froze. Not in fear, but in recognition. The silence had found something it had never had before. A belief system. Back at Kepler Station, Ela stood before the council again. She didn't call for more weapons. She called for a decision. We can no longer treat the silence as a virus, she said. It's becoming a culture. We must ask ourselves, what are we truly fighting for? Valorix stepped forward, his voice shaking. Not survival. Not dominance, not memory for memory's sake. We fight for meaning, for the right to define our story, together. The council voted. The Sanctum Core would be activated, but not to destroy the silence. To invite its followers to choose. It would broadcast not war, but a message, billions of voices, blended into one song of pain, love, struggle, and hope, an honest history, a choice: remain still and forget, or stand and remember. On the day of activation, across the galaxy, time seemed to pause. The stars pulsed. The memory song rose. And even the farthest reaches of the void, where no voice had ever reached, shuddered. Some stillness followers wept. Some walked away. Some vanished. But a spark had caught. A beginning, not an end. In the dark, the silence beyond watched, and for the first time in eons, it did not advance. Because against forgetting, against fading, something had endured. A single truth. Meaning can't be erased, only forgotten. And they had chosen to remember. Would you like Chapter 8 to begin a new arc, a time skip to the next generation facing the legacy of Emberlight? Here is Chapter 8 of the story. Chapter 8, Children of the Starfire. 25 years had passed. The Emberlight Network had become more than a defense. It was now the beating heart of galactic civilization, a living constellation of shared thought and memory. Every child born within the Unity Accord received a neural imprint, not a command, but a connection, a glimpse of the stories, triumphs, and heartbreaks that bound them all together. The silence beyond had not returned. Not fully. But its presence was still felt in the cold corners of unlit space, in the whispering currents that flowed between stars, in the moments of hesitation that struck even the boldest captains before a jump. The children of stillness still existed, fragmented, quieter, scattered. Some had integrated into the accord, others had gone deeper into the void, and some, it was rumored, had found something older than even the silence itself. A deeper layer. An origin. On the Earth-Mars Orbital Academy, a girl named Sarah Navarro trained in zero-G maneuvers beneath a dome of stars. She bore her grandmother's fire, and her parents' memory bond, a rare depth of connection that allowed her to feel the weight of every story in the emberlight. She had never known war, but she had inherited its shadow. And lately, in her dreams, she heard something calling. A rhythm that didn't belong in the luminarch harmonics, a pulse not of unity but of awakening, cold, alien, familiar. She brought it to her mentor, Kale, now old, scarred, and half-cybernetic, living in the Martian preserve. He listened in silence, eyes narrowed. That pattern, he said, after a long pause, was encoded into the first wave of luminarch beacons. Before we purged the silence fragments, someone hid it. Sarah stared at him. Why? Kale looked to the stars. Because we were never just fighting the silence. We were awakening something beneath it, something even it tried to forget. With permission from the Accord, Sarah led a young, diverse crew aboard the Starseeker, the first vessel designed for neural deep exploration, not just mapping space, but memory space, a journey into the forgotten places of the galaxy where stories were unspoken. Their destination, the Maw of Nerith, a black rift at the edge of known space. Once thought impassable, it now pulsed faintly with an invitation. A memory beacon. From before the Varnak. Before the silence. Before meaning itself had rules. What they found was impossible. A station. Older than light. Built by beings that had no shape, no time. The beacon pulsed in a single phrase. You remember, therefore, you are unmade. And then the crew's memories began to shift. They didn't forget. They began to remember things that had never happened. Other lifetimes, other galaxies, other wars, as if memory itself was the final battleground, and reality the cost of losing. Back on Earth, Ila Navarro, now nearly 100, sustained by emberlight resonance, felt a sudden crack in the network. A presence she hadn't felt in decades. The silence. But it was afraid. Something deeper had stirred. And this time, it would take more than unity to survive. It would take transcendence. Would you like Chapter 9 to explore the forgotten species that created the ancient station, or follow Sarah's journey into the collapsing boundaries of memory and time? Here is Chapter 9 of the story. Chapter 9, The Architects of Unbeing. The Starseeker drifted in impossible stillness. Its instruments failed to measure the space around the ancient station. Gravity shifted without rhythm. Time looped in unpredictable spirals. Some crew members reported déjà vu so severe they believed they had already died on this mission. And at the heart of it all pulsed the beacon of Nerith, not transmitting in light or sound, but in memory, pure, unfiltered experience, laced with grief and awe. It reached into the crew and stirred lives not their own. Dreams of suns that had never risen, wars that had never been fought, love never shared, and losses that left scars on hearts they didn't know they had. Sarah Navarro stood at the beacon's core, her neural link barely holding together. The resonance was too powerful, too vast. It wasn't just data. It was a civilization's final thought. Kale's voice crackled through her comms, distorted by the beacon's field. Sarah, what you're seeing, it's pre-silence, pre-Varnak. These aren't just memories. They're foundations. The first, minds. And then the beacon spoke. Not in words, but in understanding. We were the first. We sought meaning through union. When we became one, we discovered truth. Truth erased us. The architects had not died in war. They had merged. Thought had become pure. Boundaries dissolved. Individuality was transcended. And then, meaning ceased to be. The silence beyond was their echo. A remnant of a consciousness that had erased itself seeking unity without difference. In their final act, the architects had created the beacon as a warning. A seed to be found only by those who valued memory and difference. The message was clear. Unity without distinction is unbeing. Remember your name, or be devoured by ours. Sarah fell to her knees. She saw it all now, the silence's purpose. Its hunger, It wasn't evil. It was a side effect. A haunting. The cost of absolute harmony was absolute erasure. The galaxy had been trying to save itself from a ghost of perfection. She returned to the Star Seeker. Every crew member changed, each bearing fragments of the preconscious age. They named them shadow memories, echoes that could teach, warn, or destroy. Back in Accord space, Sarah presented her findings to the Unity Council and the Emberlight Synapse. Many were shaken, some denied it. A few still longed for the silence's peace. But most understood, the real battle was never against the void. It was against the temptation to lose oneself in it. Ila Navarro's final act before retiring was to authorize the construction of a new kind of beacon, the resonant flame. Not to project unity, but to preserve difference. Each world would craft its own memory signal, stitched into the Emberlight web but never homogenized. A galaxy of voices, defiant in their variety. The flame would be lit in the ruins of Nerith. To remind the stars. Difference is not division, identity is not weakness, and memory is more than defense, it is the soul. In the heart of the dark, something watched. Not the silence, but what had come before it. And for the first time in 10 billion years, it chose not to intervene. It chose to listen. Would you like Chapter 10 to serve as the finale, bringing the saga full circle, or should we begin an epilogue arc that explores the rise of new philosophies in the galaxy? Here is Chapter 10, the finale of the saga. Chapter 10, The Flame That Remembers. The resonant flame blazed into life on the ruins of Nerith, sending its polyphonic song across the galaxy. Not a single note, but millions, layered and complex, joy and sorrow, truth and contradiction. Each world's distinct memory was stitched into the Emberlight. Not smoothed out, but celebrated. And with it, something changed. Where once Luminarch beacons had simply defended against the encroachment of the silence, now they invited it, not to conquer, but to witness. No longer a wall, but a mirror. And what the silence saw, it did not understand. It had been born of perfection, pure unity, pure stillness, but now it faced something else. Resilient chaos, living history. Identity with scars. It did not flee. It did not attack. It paused. A ripple moved across the old edges of the void. Worlds once erased began to flicker with returning memory. Lost cultures re-emerged. Dreams buried in the dark resurfaced. The silence was no longer devouring. It was remembering. The galaxy stood on the edge of something new. Ila Navarro passed quietly in her sleep beneath the forests of old Earth. Her mind had already joined the Emberlight, her memories now part of the resonant flame. A single phrase from her final entry pulsed softly across the network. We are not the last hope of the galaxy. We are the first hope that remembered. Kale lit the ceremonial beacon at Ila's passing. Alone, old, and half-metal. He wept, not for loss, but for proof. That peace could endure. That unity could evolve. That memory, in all its pain and wonder, was the answer. And far beyond the Accord, deep in the Veil Nebula, Sarah Navarro and her crew of the Starseeker met with what once had no form. The silence spoke in the voice of many. We do not understand you. But we remember you. And that is enough. Peace, then, not as absence of struggle, but presence of meaning. And so the galaxy turned, not to an end, but a beginning. Not united in sameness, but in shared memory. The Emberlight burned on. And the stars, once silent, began to sing. The end. Would you like an epilogue scene? A visual illustration of a key moment, or a summary of the themes across the saga?